Hey, in this video we'll be talking about how an infected individual can produce multiple different variants. We will also talk about how this can be related to why variants might be showing up in water first before the wave hits the population. Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Mikola Rashek of Mirror Genomics, and before we get started, I just wanted to remind you, stick till the end of this video to find out how you could get free tickets to the upcoming COVID Q&A event. Alright, so let's get going. Recently there was an interesting publication that came out. It was a little weird because it was really short and it was just like, it looked like an observational study more than anything else, but it talked about how a vaccinated individual was able to produce a completely new variant within their lungs. So what happened with this particular person, unfortunately this individual got vaccinated. It was an elderly gentleman, got vaccinated, and soon after vaccination they produced a new variant. They got infected, and it was an infection that was asymptomatic, so they got vaccinated again, and then their disease progressed. It got really severe, and within a matter of days, eventually, unfortunately, they died despite attempts to save the individual. And this particular paper talked about how afterwards, when they did autopsy, they were able to find completely different variant in the lungs than the variant they were able to isolate literally days prior from that individual's throat area. So this is the first observation that we were able to see where a vaccinated individual could be producing a completely different variant post-infection. Now this is nothing new actually. We've known about this now when it comes to COVID-19 patients. However, but this is the first type of observation when it came to actual vaccinated individual. The paper is a little weird in that it's very brief. It does not, for example, address at all whether the presence of these two different variants could be because of the fact that this was co-infection with two variants, possibly because maybe the second variant that was isolated was very rare in Europe. This took place in Italy, so the likelihood of being co-infected was very low, and it was a related variant, so they assumed that this was basically due to evolution of the virus right inside the person's body. Now we've known that this happens where a person gets infected. You can start evolving completely new variants inside your body, but most of that information was shown with COVID-19 patients. We've known this information thanks to the fact that we now have very rapid genetic sequencing technology. It's referred to as next generation sequencing. This is the type of technology that I'm particularly interested in. And thanks to this technology, we can now show how virus evolves right inside an infected individual. However, it's during this pandemic that we've been able to show this a lot, because of course now during the pandemic viruses are being studied incessantly, and during the SARS-CoV-2 studies during the pandemic we've been able to actually show this again and again. So this is studied quite heavily. Normally this has been observed in patients who are immunocompromised, or patients who have cancer, or those who might be co-infected with HIV, and previously it was believed that it might be the immunocompromised individuals that run the highest risk of evolving new variants because of the fact that they can be infected for a very long time. Since then we've also shown that regular patients can be infected and produce new variants, as well as even hospital staff as well that is co-infected. And basically this way it was shown that when this type of evolution happens, it can be very rapid. New variants can literally show up within a matter of days. One publication even mentioned something as rapid as a single day before new variant was being able to be discovered within an individual. And most commonly, the pressure, evolutionary pressure, that is pushing this evolution is attributed to the antibodies. And the reason why is because very often when either the hospital staff or patients are being analyzed, oftentimes the new variants that show up in an infected individual, they will have mutations that help the new variants escape the antibodies, so the attacking antibodies. Also, this was shown previously that COVID-19 patients who were treated with either monoclonal antibodies or convalescent sera. Convalescent sera is when you take antibodies from a previous COVID-19 patient and you isolate antibodies from such individual and treat other subsequently patients with such antibodies. It's been shown that such individuals who been treated in such way, they've also produced variants that were attempting to escape that treatment itself. So we know that antibodies are oftentimes the evolutionary pressure that drives the viral evolution of the new variants once a person is infected. So in this context, what we're talking about here is basically it can also happen differentially in different body parts. So that means different variants could be produced in your mouth and your throat than other areas of your body. So other areas of your body that can be also infected are obviously lungs, but also I mentioned in the last video how virus can travel from your throat and mouth and nasal area down to the lungs, but same can happen is how the virus can move from your nasal and throat area down to your gastrointestinal tract. And what happens then, different variants could be produced in that body part than say in your mouth in an infected individual. So what happens there, like let's say if you have multiple variants in your mouth, they will not all move to the gastrointestinal tract. Maybe one of them might move in there, and that's called a bottleneck effect. So that's called population bottleneck. In this case, basically you reduce dramatically the population available from what you started with. And when you do that, and you reduce that population, it gives you the opportunity to have a new founder population in a new body area, and that is quite susceptible then to further mutations. Whereas if you start with a high load, oftentimes what the studies reveal is that high loads, say for example if you have a very high load in your nasal and throat area, that will not be as effective in producing diversity, viral diversity, as if you have a lower population. So what might happen with the gastrointestinal tract, and your gut is especially prone to be able to produce a lot of virus, you might be able to then produce a lot of variants in your gut. And that actually might help explain one of those observations that we've already known, how sometimes you see the variants show up in water, in wastewater, before that same variant hits the population, and you see a wave of hitting the population with that same variant. And it might make sense, because if the evolution is taking place predominantly in your gut, for example, and the gut allows you to produce a lot of different variants, and if some of these variants have an advantage, then you might be able to see it in the wastewater first before that advantageous variant starts taking over the population. So that might explain that observation. There's been other theories suggested recently as well. I clearly don't agree with that thinking. This is why I wanted to bring that up as to how that might happen. Now, in terms of the amount of virus inside your throat, again, if you have multiple variants, then it's not like you will transmit multiple of these variants next to the next person. Transmission actually of a new variant is not easy. Once again, this bottleneck effect takes place. So if you're lucky, you might transmit one new variant to the next individual, and those variants might or might not survive. That's why transmission of new variants is not necessarily easy. It might require really specialized variant in order for this to truly succeed. All right, so that's basically how that might drive the evolution of the virus. Now, what does that mean in terms of vaccines? Remember, I've already previously mentioned that vaccines themselves, there's some emerging evidence that vaccines themselves might also be contributing to the viral evolution, precisely with the antibodies, because as I mentioned previously, it's the antibodies that are attacking the virus, and the virus might be evolving in order to actually escape that attack. So I already brought up that concept in one of the videos by a very interesting group that published that information. It was spearheaded by Dr. Wei of University of Michigan, and basically the reason why I really like that group is because they're one of those few scientists who also attempt to predict the future outcomes of the pandemic. Recall that in the last video I mentioned that there's very few scientists that attempt to provide this kind of prediction. And indeed, once again, recently they published an article a couple months ago predicting that the BA.2 version of the Omicron variant is going to take over the original Omicron, which was the BA.1, which is exactly what we've seen. And it's happening right now as we speak. What is happening, according to their modeling and their prediction, is that the BA.2 variant appears to be 1.5 more times more infectious than the original Omicron variant. So that means it still has managed to continue to mutate, to be better at binding the ACE2 receptor, which is quite incredible that this virus is continuously finding ways to still mutate itself, to still bind better to the ACE2 receptor to become more infectious. But also they were able to see from analysis of approximately 185 antibodies binding to spike protein, we know what that binding looks like down to the atomic level, and they're able to use that information to show that BA.2 variant of Omicron still continues to mutate to continue to escape neutralizing antibodies. And they were mentioning that the BA.2 variant of the Omicron is still about 30% more effective at escaping further antibodies, neutralizing antibodies of post-vaccination than the original Omicron. So this continuous evolution of the virus to escape the antibodies is unimpeded. It's going on all the time. And we'll see where this will lead in the future in terms of the further evolution of the virus. The take-home message is basically that antibodies that are attacking the virus can drive its evolution and continue to be one of the force factors that are driving how the virus changes and which variants are coming out in the future. And unfortunately, BA.2 version of the Omicron is still so potent in terms of its infectivity that even those who have previously already been infected with BA.1 version of Omicron can still be reinfected with this new version as well. That's how infectious it is, and that's how capable it is in escaping antibodies. All right, if you made it this far, I wanted to let you know that we have 2 events coming up. One of it is COVID-19 Q&A right away. So for the first 10 of you who subscribe to my newsletter, we'll send you free tickets. We're looking forward to seeing you there. And those are basically, we answer the top 10 questions with regards to the questions we collected from past YouTube videos, and then it's open mic. All levels of knowledge are welcome, so that's not an issue at all. So any questions are welcome. Any level of questions are welcome. This is not for experts or anything like that. And then we have another event coming up as well, And this is me in conjunction with two other experts. One of them is a psychologist and the other one is financial advisor. And we're going to be presenting on a holistic well-being of how you can be proactive to be basically taking care of your well-being. So we're talking about financial well-being, mental health well-being, as well as physical well-being, from the concept of DNA mapping, which is of course my area that I'm in charge of. And this particular presentation is for business owners in order to present this concept to employees, to make sure that employees who have basically gone through a lot of trauma lately can have an opportunity to start healing and basically taking care of themselves in the best fashion possible. So if you're interested in that one, check it out. Links to both of these are in the description below. Finally, I can also mention we had another great podcast coming recently. So the link to that podcast is in the description below. It was the Big Science podcast. It was a lot of fun because we were talking about how DNA can be used to store information. And so please check it out. It's an unusual concept. After all, DNA is a storage of information. It's a program code that stores information that then can be used to basically run you from day to day. But we can use this type of program code to store any information you can imagine, including something like movies. So check out all of this information, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time in another installment. Bye everyone.